Greetings, curious acolytes of the Force, and welcome back to our archives. Since we have dusted off many of our old records that date back to the early time of the Sith purebloods of Korriban, there was something else that caught the eye of our researchers. There were a couple of different species that inhabited Korriban and the rest of the Sith Empire during the time of Ajunta Pal in the First Dark Jedi, and even further beyond. Living right alongside the Sith purebloods was a race known as the Massassi. When Ajunta Pal and his followers established their rule on Korriban, they quickly went to work enslaving what they deemed to be the lesser species of the purebloods and put them to work. Among these would be the small and feeble Grothu and the brutish Massassi. When talking about the old Sith Empire, many scholars only really seem to pay attention to the Sith themselves and neglect to pay mention to those whose backs the Sith Empire was really built on. So, sit with us today as we do a quick dive into the overlooked species and explain exactly what the Sith did with the ranks among them that were not Force sensitive. The Massassi were a subspecies that were relatives of the Sith purebloods, and so they shared a lot of similarities to the Sith. However, there were a few key details that set them apart from their Sith cousins. Firstly, they were far larger and had much more exaggerated features. They're very similar to the way that humans view Neanderthals and the evolution of the species. The Massassi had heavy brows, forward jaws, and even spikes that protruded from various points on their bodies. They could also be told apart as they had solid yellow eyes without any real pupils. They had their own sort of society and even their own language, so it wasn't as though they were just a different kind of Sith, they were indeed their own species entirely. The Massassi were hulking brutes of relatively low intelligence, but absolutely fierce battle instincts. Being a race that admired power above all, the Sith purebloods were a society that quickly proved themselves to be the superiors and would force any other species on the planet to serve beneath them. Interestingly though, it seemed to be the Massassi that they were pretty content serving their Sith masters, as they revered the Sith Lords as gods and worshipped them with their slave labor. One of the most key features about the Massassi is that they were absolutely loyal to a fault, and once they pledged their worship, it was their tradition that they would stay with whoever their god was until death, which wasn't very long for them in most cases. Massassi had remarkably short lifespans compared to other humanoid species in the galaxy, with their adolescence only lasting the first 10 years, and the prime of their life being somewhere around 15. Once a Massassi had reached 25, they were middle-aged, and most of them died shortly reaching after the age of 50. The Sith Lords of Korriban filled their ranks with Massassi and created entire armies of the brutes that served their function quite efficiently. Despite being of low intelligence, Massassi excelled remarkably at carrying out complex orders and military strategies, so long as each group was assigned a handler to keep them in line. Being relatives of the Sith species, the Massassi also had a very strong affinity for the Force, and because of it, they were basically naturally bred super soldiers. They were so effective, in fact, this Sorz's Sin referred to them as their greatest asset. Entire starships were crewed by Massassi during the Great Hyperspace War, and despite the Sith losing this war, the Massassi fought admirably against the Republic forces. During this war, one of the main Sith Lords that the Massassi revered as their god would be Naga Sadow, and upon his order, those that crewed the other ships of the Sith fleet turned on their Sith pureblood leaders and murdered them in the name of Sadow, taking over their ships and pledging them to the Sith Emperor. Long after his exile, Naga Sadow took a great many Massassi warriors with him to the world of Yavin 4, where Sadow actually began to use Sith alchemy to mutate and alter them. They became deranged and disturbed monsters, growing in size and bulk as well as sporting a few new fin-like growths on their heads and backs. This also turned what intelligence they had down even further, until they were basically mindless brutes and servants. After Naga Sadow's death, the Massassi on Yavin 4 devolved into being a primitive hunter-warrior type society until the coming of the great Exar Kun. Whenever Exar Kun arrived to the world of Yavin 4, he quickly established himself as their new god and commanded them to build numerous grand temples in his honor. One of these temples would be the very same one that the rebellion would temporarily make a base of operations out of in the latter years of the Galactic Civil War. According to legend, some of the spirits of the Massassi remained trapped in these temples, and by the accounts of Luke Skywalker, some rebel soldiers and pilots reported hearing strange noises, having nightmares, and seeing things in the halls of this temple during the duration of their stay. Taking looks at different species and things like these are an important step to fully understanding the grand picture of how the Sith Empire ran in these ancient eras of the galaxy. What's most tragic about the Massassi is those that were not Force sensitive were deemed even lower than Massassi that were, as the Sith purebloods valued power and the dark side of the Force itself above everything, with the Massassi believing that the Sith purebloods' ability to touch the Force was their greatest asset. This is why, if a Massassi warrior was not Force sensitive at all, they would be worked till death or put to death instantaneously, essentially being the absolute lowest on the totem pole, as the Massassi worshipped power essentially as their god, and their power was the dark side of the Force itself. What's important to note though is that the Massassi were naturally Force sensitive, so although it did occur, it was highly rare for one to be born without the gifts of the Force. However, if one was, they were the lepers of the society, believing that they had sinned against their masters and were a great plague. The Massassi warriors literally fed on the powers of the dark side, so those that could not touch it meant nothing. The Massassi were nicknamed the terrors of the battlefield among the Sith purebloods, and when the Dark Jedi arrived, they knew instantly that the Massassi were the lowest on the totem pole, despite perhaps being more useful than the purebloods themselves. They were not intelligent, but their ability to touch the dark side was just as potent, and they were considered invaluable to the ranks of the Dark Jedi. Even among the ranks of the more modern Sith, the Massassi warriors are held in high regard, as they were believed to be some of the greatest wielders of the pure energies of the dark side of the Force, although they were not very advanced whatsoever. But anyway, my friends and students of the Force, what did you think of today's opening of a Sith holocron? What are your thoughts on the ancient warrior race that lived and developed alongside the Sith purebloods in the Massassi warriors? Had you heard of them before this video, and what are your thoughts on them now? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching and continuing to support the channel. May the Force be with you, and have a great day.